Hungry Dads.
Welcome to Hungry Dads, your guided tour through the delicate and often overwhelming balancing act between food indulgences and social acceptance. And now, as always, here are your hosts, Rod Budget and Hugh Gallen.
Hello and welcome to episode 17 of Hungry Dads. I'm Rod Budget.
I'm Hugh Gallen.
And tonight we are back from winter break. We had our holidays. Do you have a good holiday, Hugh?
Yeah, it was really nice. I've got a few updates to give. But how about you? Did you have a nice holiday?
Yeah, we were able to stay at home on our home turf. A lot of eating, a lot of snacking. I'm assuming you did quite a bit of eating yourself and have some thoughts about the holidays.
Actually, I have a few headlines from the holidays, and the first one, I'll just come out with what I think is the biggest one. For the first time, I think ever, I lost weight over the holidays.
Wow.
And this is not due to some great willpower or some plan that I was going to be careful over the holidays. For some perspective, you stayed home. We traveled for the holidays. I went to my parents' house, and my mom it's a wonderful place to visit during the holidays. She's notorious for having a lot of delicious food, all kinds of snacks, hearty meals, kind of cooking that uses butter and all the good stuff that, in my day-to-day life I don't get. And then in between meals, snacks. And whenever in between those snacks, a full fridge and a full pantry, and always fudge and all kinds of wonderful things. So there's no lack of delicious holiday food. And it's the holidays, and whenever it's the holidays, it's open season on all these things. So why would I ever lose weight in this scenario? Well, it was simple as this. The kids. The kids, for the first time ever, had a real heavy effect on my holiday eating. One simple reason was that they're both at an age where they require a lot of attention during mealtime. So the meals, we'd sit down with the kids, and the entire meal was just my wife and I were serving them, dealing with them, fighting with them, getting them cleaned up, and then just trying to get them off onto the bath after meal. To the point where, just like at home, we'd scarf in a little food. I never really sat down and filled up like I normally would on my mom's wonderful home cooking. And then the all wonderful snacks that I traditionally enjoy over the holidays were thwarted by the children because you can't eat in front of them without them wanting to eat everything you're eating.
True, I can definitely relate to that. You cannot eat anything in front of them.
And so the script was really flipped on my holiday snacking. Any kind of snacking I was able to do was covert and rushed and ultimately pretty much unenjoyable. We've talked about covert eating before, but we've pretty much talked about it with respect to having to hide it from our wives. But this was a whole new perspective on covert eating. Anytime I wanted a little snack, I was hiding, running from my kids. Pretty much, it just didn't become worth it at a certain point. You can't grab a couple holiday cookies. Those kids are always there. And not that I'm against my kids having holiday cookies, but you have to have a little control if you expect them to be able to control themselves. You can't indulge the way I'd like to indulge with those kids around. Completely changed the holiday snacking dynamic, completely unexpected, completely thwarted my ability to indulge in the normal way. First holiday I've experienced it this way.
Yeah, it's a sad way to kick off the new year, honestly. It's almost as if Christmas was canceled because as adults, Christmas is about eating really now. It's about the kids and seeing them happy and getting the presents. But for me, Christmas is about pigging out. And if you can't do that, Christmas is canceled.
It really was. I was pretty much, the times I got to snack on something I enjoyed, I was pretty much cowering in the corner like a rat, trying to sneak it in, shove it in, and I left more wonderful snacks behind than ever before.
Answer me this. Did you eat a cookie or anything like that in a closet at any time over the holiday?
No, in the garage.
Ah, the garage.
I would take an opportunity to take out the trash and palm a couple cookies, or even take out the cookie tin with me, have a couple in the garage, and come back in. It was the only way I could avoid eating in front of those kids.
Yeah, that's not as enjoyable as just sitting at a table and stuffing your face.
Another follow-up from the holidays I wanted to share was a callback to episode 14. You might recall I talked about my mother's lime jello side dish.
Oh, did she make the lime jello?
She did make the lime
wow.
jello. For those who might be listening to one of their first episodes or just don't recall episode 14, I went to great lengths to talk about one of my mother's infamous side dishes, which was a lime jello salad with pineapple and nuts with a dollop of Miracle Whip in the middle. And let me just clarify one thing. I think some listeners might have missed when I was calling it Miracle Whip. They were thinking Cool Whip, which wouldn't sound that weird. Miracle Whip is like the mayonnaise, and it was lime jello basically with mayonnaise or with Miracle Whip. So this got onto the holiday table at Christmas, which made me very happy because, as we discussed last time, this is perceived as a pretty odd side dish, but yet for me, it's something I've developed a taste for. We talked at great length actually about kind of the history of this dish, how it could have come to be, and traced it back to its roots of kind of the 40s and 50s recipes that our grandmothers might have used, and then traced the current version that was being eaten by my family, which was walnuts and pineapples, and how it had evolved from this version of a Jell-O salad that probably included things like carrots and celery that my mom claimed was a, quote, Waldorf salad. Well, there's two major developments over this Jell-O salad that I had over Christmas. And the first is that there's been yet a further additional evolution in the family version of this dish. The walnuts that used to be in it are no longer. I have a daughter with a nut allergy, so now it is a lime Jell-O with pineapple and Miracle Whip, sans walnuts.
The walnuts aren't the story anyway, as long as the Miracle Whip's still there.
The Miracle Whip was still there, but the reason the nuts being removed is interesting is because my mom claimed that this was originated from a version of a Waldorf salad, and we'd gone through the ingredients of a Waldorf salad and pretty much come to the conclusion in episode 14 that the only remnant ingredient from a Waldorf salad were these walnuts. So the tether to the Waldorf salad has been severed completely. We can trace its evolution, we can trace its historical past to the Waldorf potentially, but this current incarnation now has nothing to do with the Waldorf salad. The other thing worth mentioning about this version of the Jell-O salad was that I'm disappointed to report that, I don't know if intentionally or unintentionally, it was made with diet flavored Jell-O. Completely different circumstance. I need to give my mom some feedback and ask her not to do this again. Just like we talked about in episode 6 with diet soda, diet Jell-O, it's the same problem. Terrible taste.
Yeah, I think that might compromise the taste test overall. That's not staying true to the recipe.
I'm glad to say it got on the table. It has evolved further naturally, but I need to get my mom at the very least to get back to the non-diet lime Jell-O, which I'm sure she'll do at my request. Another holiday follow-up note that I wanted to make was something I noticed myself doing. Now, I said a little bit ago that I wasn't able to do very much snacking, which is definitely true. That said, there were some times and places where I was able to indulge, and I found myself using a snacking strategy that I thought I'd share with our listeners and with you, Rod. Over this holiday season, I intentionally avoided eating my favorite homemade holiday snack. And this was an intentional strategy. This is a homemade treat. It's a Chex Mix that my mother makes. By its nature, because it's homemade, it comes in limited quantities. And the reason I didn't eat it was, again, not out of any sense of self-control. I just didn't want to get it out, lest others enjoy it and be eating it up. I knew that the leftovers would go home with me, because it's known as my favorite. My advice to anyone who's going to maybe to their mother's or to a place where they have their quote-unquote favorite snack is fill up on other things that you like. And your quote-unquote favorite, keep it tucked away. Hide it in the back. There's a lot of other snacks. If no one knows it's there, and it's your proclaimed favorite, and you know the leftovers are going to come home with you, then just don't let anybody enjoy it. There will be enough time for you to get it. So I was able to get the lion's share of this, my favorite Chex Mix, coming home with me by avoiding it from being kind of present for others to enjoy.
Yeah, I think that's a good point and a strong strategy, because it takes a lot of willpower generally when you know something like that is just lurking in the back, calling your name. But during the holidays, there's so much other stuff around you that you can kind of forget about it and pick out on the other stuff. So I think that's an insider pro tip right there.
And finally, I wanted to share a food review with everybody. I mentioned that my mother's house often has all kinds of wonderful snacks, and this year was no exception. I tried a new flavor of potato chip. These were corn on the cob flavored potato chips. They were Hers brand, Herrs, which maybe you've heard of that brand of potato chip. But these were potato chips flavored like corn on the cob. They were not corn chips. And it may sound weird to make a potato chip that tastes like corn. It is weird, actually. But I will say they were very successful in this flavor excursion. It was inevitably a gimmick, not viable as a real flavor, but it was fun to try, and it tasted like corn on the cob on a potato chip. So if you get the chance, I suggest you try them. I don't think it would ever become a staple, but a fun gimmick flavor.
So was there a buttery taste or kind of texture to them? Because when I think corn on the cob, it tastes just like corn. Then I picture like the butter and the salt and all that stuff. So was it really kind of a corn flavor, or was there something specific to the cob?
The cob part might be, even gimmick upon gimmick, because I don't know if even I delineate corn on the cob from corn all that often. I think corn on the cob might taste a little fresher, but it could have been called canned corn or creamed corn, but I don't think that would have elicited the same idea. So it was corn flavored.
But if somebody does come out with a canned cream corn flavor, I would definitely try it.
Yeah, I think probably it was in that whole area of corn flavors, but obviously the marketing people put it on the cob, which I think was smart.
Hungry Dads! Okay, now that the holidays are behind us, we're a few weeks away from the Super Bowl, which is great news for not only football fans, but snacking fans. I'm a football fan myself, but I'm definitely a bigger fan of snacking. So come game time, I'm going to hunker down on the couch. No parties for Rod Budget this year. I'm going to have a buffet of snacks just spread out in front of me for the game. And you know what Rod's number one football snack is? Chips and dips of all varieties. And come to think of it, chips and dips are really my go-to snack for TV watching. Movies, more popcorn, candy thing. But just an evening of TV or a sporting event by myself calls for some chipping and dipping. I don't know why, but it seems to lend itself to TV and sports. I consider myself a bit of a dip connoisseur and a lover of almost any chip-based dip, whether it be ranch, queso, onion dip, bean dip, salsa, guacamole, artichoke dip. I could go on and on. I've tried them all, and I like them all. But here's the thing. Often lost in the glamorous world of these colorful dips, and some are homemade, and people take a lot of trouble, lost in all of this are the chips. And I'm probably as guilty of this as anyone. I don't pay enough attention to the chip end of the chip and dip spectrum. But I saw a commercial last weekend, while watching football ironically, that made me stop and take notice. Tostitos has come out with a new product, Tostitos Rolls. And I say it like that because Rolls has an exclamation point. And that's how they would like me to say it. Apparently.
Grammatically proper. Respect the marketing people's punctuation. Well done.
Yes, Rod. Of course. Hugh, have you heard of Tostitos Rolls or seen any advertising for them?
I saw the same commercial you did, and I was excited to see this chip shape. I think it's for all the reasons you're leading up to. I think this is a great development. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. These are really the first tortilla chips I'm aware of that are tubular in nature. So our listeners may recall Hugh's review of Doritos Dinamitos in episode 4, and if you're not, go back and check it out. It's worthwhile. And the Dinamitos are similar in shape, but their flavor, and these are just straight up tortilla chips. Hugh was very impressed with the Dinamitos, so once I saw the Tostitos Rolls being advertised, I needed to try them out. So that's what I did. I went to the grocery store and was pleased to see that they were indeed already in stock. I grabbed a bag to try out, but then as I turned to go and buy them, I started thinking about the dips. I couldn't decide what would go best with a tubular chip. There were a lot of scientific and mathematical considerations running through my head. It's an art form and a science, dipping a chip. You've got viscosity, you've got surface area, you've got density of the dip. So I decided to do what any logical hungry dad would do. I bought 3 different dips to experiment with. A ranch dip, a cheese queso dip, and a traditional chunky salsa. And then I went and I was like, all right, I'm set. This is going to be a great experiment. And then another thought came to my mind. I decided it would be illogical to get 3 different dips for one kind of corn chip. So I proceeded to pick up the traditional Tostito round tortilla chips and also the Tostitos scoops. If our listeners don't know, those are the chips that are shaped like a little mini chip bowl for specifically scooping things.
And this is the kind of rigorous scientific review that happens in the Hungry Dad's laboratories. Once an experiment is underway, the mind of a Rod Budget does not just simply stay with maybe one control factor. He is looking across the board at all the variables and determining the best experiment for our listeners. So kudos to you for really reviewing this for its scientific value and not stopping with the easy experiment.
Thank you, Hugh. I appreciate that. And you're the same way. You know how it is. We develop a hypothesis, and then we start going into this not knowing where it's going to go, and your mind just starts racing with more and more food ideas. So that brings me to tonight, and for the first time that I know of in podcasting history, I present the ultimate 3x3 chip dip scoop off. Ultimate 3x3 chip dip scoop off. Now, before we get started, here's a bit of background. This is not a live taste test review like some of the ones we have done in the past. I conducted this earlier today in the Hungry Dad's test kitchen. I considered a live review, but then decided with 3 different chips and 3 different dips, it was first of all going to take a long time. Second of all, it's going to be very messy, and I might get some dip on the microphone, which would compromise the podcast.
I also think that an experiment like this requires the pristine conditions of the laboratory setting. So I'm glad you didn't try to do this live, because with dealing with 3 different chips and 3 different dips, that's a lot of ingredients, a lot of test tubes. You don't want that trying to deal with that in a podcast. So again, the integrity of the experiment, I think, was saved.
Yeah, this certainly lends itself to more of a scientific approach and not a instantaneous reaction. Secondly, I just want to address why Tostitos. Tostitos has always been my dipping chip brand of choice. I think they have the most breadth of shapes and flavors, and they're kind of the leader, so that's why I went with the 3 Tostitos varieties. And when conducting the test, I was looking for overall pleasure of eating the dip off the chip, which isn't just simply taste, as you probably know, Hugh. It's messiness. Is the chip breaking? Of course, does it taste good? But it's kind of a combination of a lot of factors. So, if you're ready, I'm going to just go and run down the results. I'm going to do the dips in alphabetical order. I thought that was the fairest way. So I'll start with the cheese queso dip. First, I tried the standard round Tostitos chip with the queso, and it was very good. The queso does not slide off the traditional chip. There's a nice texture and crunch. There's no breakage of a full-size circular Tostitos when you scoop the queso, and it wasn't really messy. I'll give the standard Tostitos round chip with the queso a very high grade. Next up was the Tostitos scoop with the queso, and these break in the thick queso very easily. It's messy also when you get too aggressive with a scoop. Your thumb is going to go down into the queso that's filling the scoop. So if you get too aggressive, even if it's a successful non-breaking scoop, your thumb might get some cheese in it. So overall, the scoops and the queso was not a good combination. Last but not least is the brand new entry, the rolls. The rolls with the queso had a nice texture, and the beauty of the rolls is that the cheese fills the hollow opening of the tube as you're eating it. So you're kind of getting some cheese on the outside and pouring down the straw-like infrastructure. It is potentially messy if you're not careful with the drippage. If you hold the cheese for too long before putting it in your mouth, it's going to drip. So I could see this, from bowl to mouth, dripping onto a shirt very easily.
You mentioned dripping with the Rolito style. You didn't mention the dripping with the round. So am I safe to say that you felt you had more control with the round style?
Yeah, the standard round, what happens is you can pretty much, using gravity, get most of the cheese on top of it, so you're resting it like a platter of cheese. There's going to be a little bit on the bottom, but not enough where the weight is going to drip down on you, unless you take, an inordinate amount of time. With the roll, they're so tubular in nature, and there's not a flat surface. So
yeah. You're dealing with two dimensions, I suppose, with the round.
Exactly.
With that Rolito, you've got a 360-degree surface. There's always going to be some cheese fighting gravity.
Exactly. There's a lot of physics, a lot of geometry in play here. So just to summarize the queso category, I would say the standard round tortilla chip is the best, with the rolls just slightly behind. And scoops I would stay away from with the queso. They're bad, they break a lot, they're messy. The next category is the ranch dip, starting again with the standard round tortilla chips. I found, for some reason, the standard chips a bit salty for the ranch. The ranch and salt didn't go real well together. Although the scoops and rolls are also salty, the standard are more salty, I find. So the salt kind of overpowered the ranch. It was a weird flavor. There was also more running drippage issues than with the queso, just from the fact that the ranch has a lower viscosity and is a little runnier. So there was a little bit of drippage. It's not something that you can't manage, but it was a little messy and salty. Next up were the scoops with the ranch dip. There were no breakage issues like I had with the queso. Still had the thumb issues though. I might be too aggressive in my dipping. I like a lot of dip with a chip. So I'm probably filling the scoop up a little too much and my thumb's getting in it. But there's not much surface area to hold on to with the scoop shape once you dip it. But it was much neater than the queso and it wasn't bad. The salt issues weren't there and it tasted decent. The rolls with the ranch, same as the queso basically. You had the ranch running down the middle. Still a little bit of neatness problem, as you might expect with the ranch. But the taste was dynamite. It was really, really good with the rolls. The rolls seemed less salty to me. I think there's not as much surface area for the salt to stick to. And it was a nice taste. So to summarize the ranch category, I would say that the rolls are the best. Despite the messiness issues, you got to be careful, but the taste alone kind of elevated it. The scoops are good, definitely better than with the queso, and the standard chips with the ranch was kind of bad, too salty, too messy.
Okay, and I've got a theory on the next category that might just round this out nicely. I'm anxious to hear what happens with salsa. I've been taking notes this whole time, and I'm going to go forward with a hypothesis that these scoops are going to be optimized with the salsa. You were in the laboratory. I'm just doing a thought experiment here.
No, that's what science is all about. You have a hypothesis, and I'm gonna prove or disprove it. So with the salsa, and this is a standard chunky Tostitos brand salsa as well. The standard round chips. It's good, but the trouble you run into with the standard chips and salsa is it's tough to cover much of the chip with the salsa. There's a lot of wasted chip because you have to leave a lot of room for gripping the chip, but also it's hard to distribute a lot of salsa on a round surface because the salsa is not that runny, whereas with the cheese and the ranch you can get a little and kind of tilt it from side to side and get a good coverage.
It's not as sticky. You got a balancing act with this salsa, am I right?
Exactly, it's a balancing act, and there's a lot of wasted chip. And as I was eating the round chip with the salsa, the thought occurred to me, well, maybe this is why they came up with the scoop chip. So that brings us to the scoop and the salsa. And as Hugh predicted, of course, he's a professional, this is why the scoops exist. It's in the wheelhouse of the scoop. This is why the scoop was invented. It's a mini bucket of salsa. It works beautifully. You have to be a little bit careful not to break it. If you get really aggressive and try to do it fast, they break. But if you're careful, you can get a nice fill of salsa. It fills the bucket. The bucket doesn't run. It's neat. You get a lot of chip texture with the salsa, and it's quite pleasant. And last but not least, or actually last and maybe least, is the salsa with the rolls. As you might imagine, it's not good. It's even worse than the standard chips in the salsa coverage. As Hugh mentioned, there's no stickiness to the salsa, and the rolls are three-dimensional. There's no flat surface, so it's really hard to get a coating on the rolls. It's messy. It's just not advised. And I think when Tostitos came up with the rolls, they knew they already had the scoops in their back pocket. They weren't concerned about this. But I think it's something that the average consumer might not think of. They might pick up some rolls and, oh, tortilla chips, I eat that with salsa. Don't do it, folks. Don't do it. Hungry Dads!
Rod, for this segment, I'd like for you to go on a journey with me, on a thought experiment to the imagination into a scenario. And the scenario is this. Imagine with me that it is the apocalypse. Particularly, it's a zombie apocalypse. There's no question. There's been an outbreak. There you are. What's your plan of action? What are your priorities? And what are you thinking are your next steps here? What do you need to be thinking about?
The first thing that pops in my head, obviously, is family. I need to secure the family, make sure we're all together. Yeah, I mean, food's gonna be right up there. I'm gonna have to, I'm gonna have to obtain some food.
Number one, obviously, I want to talk about food. I want to focus on the food. That's what we're here to talk about. And I want to talk about food in a zombie apocalypse situation. But you also mentioned your family, and I'm really glad you did. Because for this thought experiment, I want to pretend that we aren't dads. I take this from a really, very real place. I'm a big fan of zombie fiction. And I read a lot. I read a lot of books about zombie apocalypse, and I watch the movies, and I enjoy them all except for one. There's one book that I bought and I couldn't finish it because the whole storyline is that the guy's a dad and he's got his little kid with him in the zombie apocalypse, and I couldn't finish it. It was just too upsetting. It was too scary. I bailed on it completely. So anytime there's a child in these stories, I'm out. I don't enjoy it. I'm too afraid. So for this scenario, let's pretend that maybe we're in our bachelor days, which before we had our families. Put yourself in that mindset. Your goal is survival. You're not just throwing in the towel. You are going to take the steps that you need to survive. And some of the considerations, you mentioned food, and that's obviously where we're going to head. There are other considerations like weapons and shelter and things like that that one's going to want to think about. But I want to focus on the food considerations. We're going to be weighing those other things against it a little bit, but just off the top of your head, do you have any thoughts on how you might deal with the food problem in a zombie apocalypse type situation?
I mean, fast food keeps popping in my head. I think I'm already admitting that I'm out, so I just want to go pig out. That's all I can think of. These zombies are coming. I can't do anything about it. I just want to
So
go.
what are you gonna you're gonna raid a McDonald's and just
Yes, I'm
take
picturing
whatever's there?
chaos reigning at like a fast food place or maybe a pizza place, and I'm just I'm just shoveling food in. That's all I can think about. I mean,
Okay, so Rod's thrown in the towel. So let me try to give our listeners and a little bit of potentially more sound advice on how one might deal with this. And maybe after hearing this, well, no, I think I might have some more sound advice than running to McDonald's and shoving cheeseburgers in your face, in the face of certain death. But kudos to you for your honesty. Maybe after hearing some of this, you would reconsider your strategy and try to survive.
I'm not the type to bolt myself in the house with almost no food and hope that things go well. I'm going out with a bang.
Okay, so for the rest of us who might try to survive, I wanted to bring up a couple of tips, a couple of thoughts about food in this type of apocalypse. And I'm putting in frame of a zombie apocalypse because I think it's fun. Some of this would actually be helpful in a normal apocalypse, but I digress. So first of all, one piece of advice that I can give for an apocalypse type situation is if you're thinking about, what do you think about canned food? Canned food is a good choice or a bad choice in this kind of situation?
I think canned food keeps a long time, so that's probably a good choice. Refried beans, things like that. You don't have to heat up necessarily. I'm thinking lots of beans. Beans in a can.
Right. Yep. So the canned food is generally a good thought. The upside to it is that it lasts a long time. Another big upside is that it contains water. It's preferable to, say, dried foods for that reason because you're going to get some water from it. The downside is that if you're on the move, it's going to be heavy. But canned foods are often the kind of things you're going to want to be foraging for. So one's mind should go right to canned food, probably not fast food, Rod. Just saying.
I'm going to be enjoying my fast food quite a bit.
I want you to try to go with me here, and let's say you get to your fast food joint, you gorged yourself, and it turns out you're still alive. Let's say you want to try to survive. Where do you think it would be the best place to go? I'll give you a couple of options. To a school, to a grocery store, or back to your home. What do you think? There's upsides and downsides to all three. I'll be honest with you. It's not a trick question. But what would be your first choice if you were to go to one of those?
I would probably say my home because I'm familiar with the layout and certain escape options, and it's kind of my home turf, whereas with a school or a grocery store, even if they're schools or grocery stores I've been to, I'm not as familiar with the back rooms and where I can go. Zombies can't move very fast, I know that, so at my own home, at least I have, windows and the back door and things like that I know where they are.
Okay, yeah, and that'd be a common choice. One thing about going to the home, which if you can kind of avoid the drama of it all, is, and you're thinking long term, you might be able to say build a garden, which would be sustainable for food. But one of the bad sides of that is to do a garden, you'd have to be exposed to the outside, which puts you both at risk for zombie type threats as well as human threats. Don't forget that not only are the zombies a threat, but anyone who might see you with food and supplies might try to attack you. There are going to be marauders out there. So if you, God forbid, you get a successful garden going, if it's visible, it's just going to be overtaken. And that's true of almost any kind of sustenance that you might
Yeah,
gain.
I'm planning on my 15,000 calories from McDonald's to hold me over for a little while.
You know what? I got to say, in all my research, that was not one of the options, but honestly, it's starting to sound like the best one of everything I researched. I mentioned schools, and the research I did mentioned that this might be a good way to go. Not only do they likely have a cafeteria that's well stocked and has the ability to cook food, but it might not be the first place people would think to go, and so it might not be overrun. It's also arguably secure. A lot of people might think going to a hospital would be a good move, but that's where a lot of sick people are going to go. So you're going to see a lot of contamination. You're going to see a lot of people, a lot of competing for the resources. So compared to a hospital, a school is actually probably a pretty good choice. You got the food options. Hopefully it's not something a lot of people are thinking of, and you can secure it potentially.
I stayed away from the school. I was probably overthinking it, but I'm not the zombie aficionado that you are, but I was assuming that schools are thought of as safe havens and safe places that zombies wouldn't go to, but zombies are going to go anywhere. But I think that's a good point with the school cafeteria, because when people think of schools, they don't think of food right off the bat.
And so what about a grocery store? Let's say you had the opportunity to hole up in a grocery store. You think that would be a good idea, bad idea? Any ups or downs to that kind of thought?
I'm thinking there's probably going to be a lot of competition at the grocery store, because as opposed to a school, it's the first place people are going to go to when they think, hey, I need food, it's the end of the world. Assuming you can get to a grocery store relatively quickly and stock up, I think that's fine. But as far as holding up, I don't know. I think, like you said, there are going to be marauders out there. Unless you have some pretty serious reinforcements, it's probably not a safe place.
Yeah, you hit on kind of the downside of the grocery store. It seems like a great idea because it's going to have a lot of stocks, but once you get there, even if you can secure it, you're going to have to defend that turf. And a grocery store with its big glass windows and its obvious source of food is going to be attractive to lots of competition that you're going to have to be able to hold off. So maybe not the first option for normal Joes like you and I who don't have stockpiles of weapons and a lot of skills. Now, another thought, if you live in an area where you can secure maybe a bodega instead of a large grocery store, this is a little more sustainable. Not only are bodegas, and again, for our listeners who might not know what I mean when I mean a bodega, I mean like a corner market type of store. The reason these are a better idea potentially is because they're a little less obvious to the standard passerby. They also often have these metal roll down gates that will keep out both zombies and competition. So they're more secure, they're more discreet. So if you're thinking about going to a place with food, avoid the supermarket, go to the more local type of establishment. Secure that, try to keep a low profile, roll down your metal gate, and hopefully you can just stay out of the way and ride this out. How about living at sea? Do you think living at sea would save you in a zombie apocalypse, Rod?
I think it doesn't sound like a very practical option. I think as far as surviving for the short term, it's probably good, but I mean, being stranded at sea is no fun either. I guess you could try to get some fish and become a survivalist at sea, but I don't know. The sea's pretty unforgiving in general.
Yeah, that you're exactly right. So your apocalypse instincts are pretty good here, better than you give yourself credit for, or than I give you credit for, based on your first answer.
I still say McDonald's is my first stop. Maybe Arby's now that I think more about it, because I don't think people really like Arby's very much, and that roast beef's going to keep for a long time. So I might go to the back room of an Arby's and just chow down on some roast beef.
If you're looking for less competition and something that's going to stay in your stomach for a while, Arby's is a great choice. I think you're really onto something. Living at sea is not necessarily going to work. It takes a lot of skill to survive at sea. Getting the nutrients that you need from just fishing is going to be tough. You're going to end up with scurvy, basically. So unless you're a seasoned seagoer, yes, living at sea might sound like a good idea, but from a food standpoint especially, you're not going to get what you need. The real answer here, other than the fact that a zombie apocalypse is a pretend thing, is that the best thing one could do for this type of situation is to prepare. And there are actually people out there who are, what you call doomsday preppers. A lot of their planning goes into food. And I am not going to become a doomsday prepper, but I do think it would lend itself to a lot of food implications that would be kind of interesting. They have to procure all kinds of non-perishable goods in bulk and know how to prepare them, learn about plants and farming, and basically, if you're really prepping, you're going to eat healthier, wean yourself off luxury foods, and actually, stay in shape. The research I did said, conservatively, if you're going to prepare for a doomsday type scenario, you need 1,500 hours of effort to go into it. And I don't think that's anything I'm going to be doing anytime soon. So in the end, despite my bit of research for this segment, I think I'm just as prepared as you are, and I may as well just join you at Arby's, stuff myself with roast beef, and say goodbye to the world.
Hungry Dads! Visit our website at hungrydads.com. Follow us on Twitter at hungry_dads. This has been a Hungry Dads production.
And I got this weird sound effect maker.
Oh, that's not bad.